I couldn't really identify why. I was just angry and bitter. I felt like I was a victim. I knew something was fundamentally wrong, but I had no tools, no ability to really deal with it. I was born in New York and was raised by my mom and dad until I was approximately 8 years old. And then my folks divorced and was then left in a long, protracted custody dispute. It was pretty traumatic in that growing up, my mother was schizophrenic and bipolar and was addicted to prescription drugs and was violent. We moved a lot when I was young. One parent would get a hold of me and hide me out because the custody trials went on for a number of years. So my mom hid me out in a little town in Iowa, and then my father found out where I was and kidnapped me out of Waterloo, Iowa. From there, life was just a lot of moving, a lot of turmoil. I remember having to finally make a decision. I had to go before the judge and decide who I was going to live with. I remember that was really traumatic in that my mother had been caught in a lie and was, as she was being led out of the courtroom, was screaming, say you want to live with me, say you want to live with me, and I'll give you a mini bike, I'll give you a dog, I'll give you whatever. And then having to go into the judge and say that I really wanted to live with my dad. Years later, I just realized that it was really damaging to me in a lot of ways. All through my elementary school years, I'd have a reoccurring nightmare of being fed feet first into two giant stainless steel rollers and being crushed between, having to bounce between. My mother would have me all summer, and then in the fall, my dad would have me. My dad had been quite a playboy, very, very much into the party scene, a lot of different women in and out of our household. He eventually settled down, became very respectable, climbed the corporate ladder. I remember feeling really betrayed when my dad remarried, and then all of a sudden there's a new person that's got his attention, two new little boys that he adopted, and he just sort of became silent and distant in my life. All of a sudden, I just came from a very wild and lawless bringing up and then into a very structured, I freaked out, went back to live with my mom. And that was just a terrible situation. I mean, that's when I first started drinking heavy and smoking. Eventually, she had a breakdown, and that's when I went to live back with my dad and his new wife and just dropped into a family. And that was a hard adjustment for me. In 8th grade, I started using drugs. Became increasingly embittered. I was angry. I felt like I was a victim. When I graduated from high school, I just spiraled almost immediately into drugs and alcohol. Ended up homeless, was living on the streets, sleeping rough for about 6 months. And I overdosed. And the people that I was with considered me really to be a risk. And so they decided that it was best that I wasn't around. So they dropped me off somewhere out on Highway 99. A friend of mine, he found out where they dropped me off, picked me up, and he said, let's go to Yuma, Arizona. I'll help you get on your feet. And from there, we started hitchhiking down to Arizona. And a fellow came on the on-ramp. His name was Don. And he started to preach the gospel to me. And I didn't want to hear the message that my life was a mess. I didn't want someone, telling me what I needed to do. So I took a bunch of LSD, and it was cut with other fillers and stuff like that. And it just was turned into a really, really bad trip. Don asked if he could pray for me, and because I was really in a lot of discomfort. And I, at that point, just relented and said yes. And he prayed for me, and in that moment, I just became lucid and clear. I mean, it just was like, all of a sudden, just the fog lifted, and I realized that my life was really the sum of choices that I had made. And with that overwhelming sense of personal responsibility that was revelatory in that moment, I remember very clearly just saying, "You're bigger than I am, you're stronger than I am, you win, I'll follow you, I'll submit my life to you." I don't know how it explained that, except that it was just a moment of revelation, just a moment where Jesus just made himself real to me. I don't exactly remember how communicated to Dawn that I'd made a decision, but he says, "Why don't you come with me? Why don't you follow me?" It was just what I felt like I should do. We went to a hippie commune in Williams, Arizona, where Dawn was going back to preach the gospel to. And so from there, I ended up at a Christian commune called the Lighthouse Ranch. And it was there that really the Lord put me back together. He just took this really broken guy and just rebuilt me from the ground up, and just had so many powerful encounters with the Lord as he started to affirm that he cared for me, affirm that he had a purpose for my life. That was huge. Once that sense of being forgiven for my sins and that type of thing, but then realizing that I had a place in God's plan to accomplish things for him and for his kingdom, that captured my heart, and that really set the course of my life. So I started to have real hope for my life, real hope that the new choices I was making could lead to different outcomes, and it did. Within 6 months, I had a vehicle and was an entrepreneurial spirit had been put into me, and so it was there I met my wife. Been married 47 years now, and I wouldn't trade a day. My life has just been tremendously blessed. I mean, there's no way that my history should end up in a life that's full of purpose, full of grace, allowed me to serve in many different churches and to lead churches and to be a part of this church, which I just absolutely love. Sometimes I'm asked what I would say to someone that is caught up in the lifestyle of that type of thing, or that's suffered trauma. I think part of the way to recovery is not to minimize the things that have happened to you, but to realize that we all have choices and we all have decisions that we have to make. As long as we live in a state of victimhood or feeling like we have no choice, we really don't. We've actually built a prison bar around us. But if we can look at our life and say, man, what happened was really terrible. It shouldn't have happened, but it did. And then I've made these choices. Once you see that, then the path out is very clear. I need to make better choices. And God's really there to help us do that. Margie and I have been tremendously blessed. We had 6 children, and he's always taken care of us and given us a life that has really been worth living.